afternoon. Welcome to Ed Nation with Dan and Chris on CastleRockRadio.com.
Hey, Chris, how you doing this beautiful afternoon?
Do you know, in Denver, this is probably the first time I've received so much snow that I've never had to shovel. It seems like we get it in the morning and it's gone by the afternoon.
Well, it is Wednesday afternoon, so we're going to start going back toward that trend of being in the 60s and 70s till we get to Sunday evening. Then it'll start snowing again.
Colorado's a beautiful place to be.
It really is. So, got a couple updates here. First thing I want to talk about is one of the most important jobs in a high school.
Counselor.
Counselor is a great
teacher.
job. Yes.
Lunch lady.
Yes. The one I wanted to talk about today, though, is athletic director.
Oh, yes.
Kind of a preface. We have two great, actually we have several great athletic directors in Douglas County, but we had two that were recently honored by their specific groups. CADA, the Colorado Association of Athletic Directors, honored Bob Nelson, the Thunder Ridge High School athletic director, with the 5A Athletic Director of the Year award. And then we had the National Federation of High Schools honor Tim Ottman from Ponderosa High School with a citation of excellence, meaning that he goes above and beyond in the service of athletics at a national level. So congratulations to both Bob and Tim. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the job that they have. So tell me, Chris, what do you think an athletic director does at a high school?
It'd probably be a quicker show if we did what they didn't do.
That's probably true.
Do you know what's kind of amazing is you threw out a lot of things. Athletic director, 5A, some of these things. 5A is a large school. I think, what is it? They have more than 1,800 students?
I think the cutoff is 1,600, I believe.
Students.
I believe.
So there you have a huge school, a lot of population. You can draw a lot of teams. And everybody knows there's a lot of high school sports ranging from POMs and cheerleading, which I believe are going into the national finals this weekend.
I believe so.
To golf teams now. We have huge lacrosse programs.
Tennis, swimming.
These large schools not only field all of these sports, but they field a large number of participants in each of these sports. To be an athletic director, you've got to coordinate the tryouts, following the state policies around fair and equal treatment of everybody who wants to participate. Then you've got to have the scheduling. There are conferences that you have to worry about. And, if you're in a competitive school, then you've got playoffs. I mean, you have to love sports to do this job.
Oh, absolutely. And you're there. You identified several of the big things that they do. I know in Douglas County schools, there's approximately 900 to 950 students in each school that participate in athletics in our programming. So roughly half the student body.
In every school.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so you talk about activities lumped in on top of that, and many of these kids do both. They'll do athletics and activities, and they're trying to take care of grades.
And when you were out one week and we had Derek Cheney come in, who is the district athletic director. He works with all those schools. He said 75% of our population are involved in an athletic activity or just an activity, a club, something else.
Right, and that's true. And I think kids see the value of that, and parents see the value of that. It's a great thing to have on a resume, number one. But number two, keeps them busy, keeps them around a great group of students, keeps them going.
Well, and we've talked about research. Kids that are involved with these things generally do better in school and stay out of trouble.
I think the GPA on average is somewhere in a 3.2, 3.3 range for kids that participate in athletics and activities as opposed to other students. I think I remember reading that somewhere.
And the other part of this is, what do the athletics and activities play to? They play to some of our more diverse populations, some of our people that necessarily aren't as engaged traditionally with school, but this is a draw for them.
Well, it's a great opportunity for parents and kids to have discussions about, hey, if you want to do this, you got to do this. And that sometimes motivates kids to do the best that they can do in other places that they wouldn't necessarily be as engaged. But I wanted to go back to a little bit more about what the athletic director does. So in our district, all of our athletic directors are actually assistant principals in charge of athletics. The reason that we went that direction is because we wanted to have that additional administrative credential that went along with it. We also use them in evaluating teachers in our building as well as coaches. So many, if not all of them, have been teachers at some point in their career, so they understand the whole process of teaching and learning, and so they're really involved in evaluating teachers in their building as well as the coaches. So they do both of those things simultaneously. When you get to the spring sports, there are so many spring sports going on, and when we were talking about the snow. take the snow, for instance. What that does to an athletic schedule is
Right.
absolutely amazing. You know, I was an athletic director back in Oregon. You know, it rains a lot in Oregon. I knew I could look out my window and there was a certain place on the concrete out there. If the pool of water was at a certain level, I knew we weren't playing baseball that day. So I'd start making phone calls at about 1 o'clock. And you know, it takes a while to get to that rhythm. But the fact of the matter is I think our baseball teams in particular this spring have played less than half of their schedule. And so once we start getting nice weather, there's probably 3 weeks left in baseball season at the most of Colorado High School Baseball Association play. They better have a lot of live arms because they're going to be playing
Right.
almost every single night.
And that athletic director's got to work with all these other teams to start coordinating all
That's
these
right.
rescheduling.
That's right. Because the worst thing that can happen is you put a team on a bus and they take off and they start going to another school, and a bus is coming from that school with their team toward your school. So they wave at each other, and you know you had a scheduling snafu. So our athletic directors have to keep all that organized, and all of them have great secretaries that help them with that organization too. But from start to finish on any season, they're involved with the, you know, taking in the fees, with equipment, with helping coaches with communication with parents, with going through the processes for cutting and selecting teams, scheduling games, scheduling transportation, officials, monitoring those games once the game starts. So crowd behavior at games is a big piece of that as well. If you have a successful athletic program, like many of ours are, you not only get the opportunity to see regular season, but you get postseason. And a lot of times the postseason goes all the way into the start of the next regular season. So in some school districts, you know, they may get a break between football and basketball season. Not in our district. I mean, a school like a Highlands Ranch or a Thunder Ridge or a
Any one of the
Ponderosa,
nine.
pretty much any one of them. And you remember when we had the whole list of who was playing in the playoffs. They play football until basketball season. You may be done with the football season, and the next weekend you got a basketball game starting. And so that takes its toll because there's no break in between these seasons. Not to mention parent concerns and addressing those. And we all know that while we don't want athletics to be overshadowing, it is. I mean, it's a big deal to a lot of people. And so, you know, they have to deal with a lot of the concerns around coaching, around playing time, around positions, all that stuff too, the athletic director does.
And anyone who wants to see how complex this is, all they really have to do is go on the CHASA website, Colorado High School
Activities and athletics.
Student Athletics, Activities
Yep.
and Athletics, CHASA. You Google that, you go on, you can actually get the calendar. There's a PDF of all the sports and their start and end dates and how they overlap. I mean, I have a 10-year-old who's actually already looked at this because he wants to know which sports he can do simultaneously or can't do because they overlap.
Right.
I mean, a parent wants to go and take a look at this, just see the culmination of all the sports that are offered, and then think, you got one guy in a high school who's making all this happen. I mean, he's certainly enlisting help and doing some delegation, but he's in charge of it. He oversees it. It is all his responsibility.
Well, and not to mention scheduling games. You're right. There is a ton of things that go along with it, and it's a huge responsibility. So to kind of wrap it up here, I want kudos to Bob Nelson and Tim Ottman. They are two class individuals, run great programs. They work very hard with their coaches at communication and making sure that students get a great benefit from athletics. Very, very competitive programs. They've both been doing it for a while, but they're just top of the heap for sure.
We certainly highlight teachers and support staff quite a bit, principals, administrators. Athletic director, just another role in a large district, and we have two that have been recognized here in the state and nationally. So kudos to them.
That is amazing. Amazing.
All right, let's switch gears. This is the show where we talk local and national. So do you know that the next generation science standards are coming out?
All right.
Let's
talk about those.
3 years in the making. It took 3 years to have new science standards. First of all, 3 years?
So what are the new science standards?
Well, what's interesting is the content probably has been narrowed. They're focusing on depth, not breadth. It's kind of that Doug Reeves, an inch wide and a mile deep versus that mile wide and an inch deep.
Right.
We've been criticized in education as trying to teach too much, and because we have so much to teach, we don't get into it in depth. So a couple of things that they thought would be a focus in the 3 years of development were that this would lead young people to apply their learning through scientific inquiry and engineering design processes.
I think that's cool. That's what needs to happen.
Do you know, because we're educators, this is kind of appealing to us. We look at this and go, okay, science standards, whatever. Ooh, science standards that are going to be focused on kids actually having to do something?
Well, and that's the application piece that we've talked about multiple times. It's not just theory or content, but what do you do with that theory and content to actually do something with it?
Now, the Common Core is one thing. Common Core, we've talked about, national implications and implementations. But again, we've filtered it through Bloom's. So when you look at, which is that hierarchy of learning, if you look at the Common Core, there's a lot of remember and know and very little apply. So when we've talked about what we want for our kids, it's not that. We want evaluate, we want synthesize, we want create. It kind of sounds like these science standards were worth the 3 years of development.
That plus is really what we're looking for.
Yeah, if they're really going to have it. Now, engineering's the other piece of this. We have talked about STEM a lot. It's got national movements. Everybody wants science, technology, engineering, and math in their buildings. It sounds good. It plays to the adult-oriented mind more so than maybe the student, because I think the student is like STEM, okay, but if you talk about the concepts of engineering, and we've talked, about how these are actually the hands-on that we were encouraged to do in science a long time ago, the engineering is real applied stuff, is really evaluative stuff.
So, and we have some great programs in our district that are pursuing this that aren't necessarily called STEM. That's kind of a buzzword now. People say STEM, and now they're talking about STEAM, where you insert arts into science,
STEM,
technology,
sure.
engineering, and mathematics. But the crux of the whole thing is in all of our high schools, there's multiple opportunities for varied science classes, varied math classes, tons of technology. And then when you take the next step, we have some schools that have some specialized programming in that. For instance, I was just out at Rock Canyon High School, and the science teacher there, Christy Piccone, I think she's been on the show before.
Yeah.
She was telling me they have 3 students that they are going to grant what's called a STEM certificate to. And what that implies is that they've done a certain number of science, technology, and engineering and math-related courses at Rock Canyon High School. So they get a regular diploma, and then they get a little decal or something on there that says, they're STEM certified, which means they've taken additional courses. And I think that's been the dream in all of our high schools is how can you engage kids in when they sit down and start talking about, I want to take elective courses. What elective courses are they taking? And there's always a time for an art class, music class, PE class. But are there other opportunities you have so that you engage all students? Because not all students want to participate in some of those classes, but there's kids that want to be in additional science classes, additional math classes. So what are you doing as a school to create those opportunities? The thing I like about having some additional planning around science is that it really tells you that that's important. Somebody took the time to sit down and go, okay, what do we need to have kids know and be able to do at the end of this? And how can we ensure that all kids have an opportunity for this? And then from that, once they have those basics, where can they go next? And I think that's one of the powers of what we do in Douglas County Schools. We have a very varied program of science elective courses.
Yeah, especially in the high school. And we've made a conscious effort over the last few years to drill it down.
Right.
Middle school, equally strong. Elementary coming along with that. I mean, we've used different things like science FOSS kits, where it has been a packaged hands-on program that can be facilitated by the teacher. The connection to the standards has been questioned, but some of that stuff, I mean, when you're talking about the OWL one, where they're actually working with owl stool and trying to dig it out, you might think this is gross, but the kids love it.
Right.
And it's real life. It's the circle of life. It's no longer a piece of paper and a flow chart with arrows going around. So I'm hoping, this is my hope as we move forward with this, if we have science standards, and we're going to take a look at them and have a chance to see if they truly are as good as they aren't, I can't wait for them to model social studies after this. Because social studies, when I was in school, was sit and get, and it's tough to dress it up sometime other than getting in costume and making some food at elementary. So,
well, we're in luck because there's some exciting things going on in our high schools with social studies too, as well.
All right, let's jump in as we get back. You're listening to Everything Education on Ed Nation with Dan and Chris on CastleRockRadio.com. Welcome back. You're listening to the show that talks about everything education throughout the nation and dials it back down to Douglas County, where this is broadcasted in Castle Rock, CastleRockRadio.com. When we went to break, we were talking about the new science standards, and boy, on paper they sounded great. And I said, I can't wait for social studies to kind of jump on board with this, and hopefully that's their next project. And you said, well, Chris,
let me tell you. What's really interesting about social studies is that there has been quite a bit of discussion in our district in the past few years. When we scaled back our graduation requirements, there was a pretty strong discussion about how much social studies does a student need. There's some classes that kids have to take by state mandate, econ being one of them, which I think is a good idea. Obviously, with the state of our economy, I think there'd be a lot of opportunities for real life applications of that in our buildings.
Right.
And in fact, I think that does happen in our buildings. There's a lot of applications, but that's not till you're a senior. And so, you have ancient civilization, world geography. That's generally a freshman level course. Then as a sophomore, you take U.S. history. Then, there's some courses in there that you have to take, or the general trajectory. But I think your comment was, short of dressing up, it's pretty tough to deliver that. The sit and get piece, I think, is remembering dates, times, battles.
And I think we're fortunate. I think we're fortunate, certainly here in Douglas County, that we have great teachers that can take any content and make it interactive with kids. But this was a different side of it. The science standards had become more interactive, so it was a bigger jumping off point, maybe less work for teachers, or a better starting point for teachers. And I was thinking, wow, that would be wonderful.
You know what I think would be really awesome is to bring a social studies teacher on board here. But I know when we were starting out at Rock Canyon High School, Megan Brown, who's an assistant principal there now, worked very, very hard at making social studies be more than just dates and times and that stuff. So, they would start out with themes about, how does geography influence where cities are built, or how does weather influence where cities are built, that kind of stuff. And she did a great job of putting that together. So kids in a social studies class would use those big questions that they could apply to other classes. And I thought that was a really interesting way of doing that. That also is a way for them to connect to English classes, to connect to science classes. What were the major science inventions or theories that grew up during this time frame? I mean, that's how you get to that connectivity between disciplines.
Exactly. I remember seeing a great lesson, and it was a social studies lesson, but the kids were learning Pythagorean's theorem in math. And do you remember, a squared plus b squared equals c squared? It's the triangular formula.
Boy, do I.
Yes. But we had to memorize that formula. Very rarely did it get drilled down when we were younger to what it actually meant. Well, the social studies teacher had built this web on the ceiling and was connecting all these points from other subject areas. So Pythagoras, and when he was born, on the timeline, and as it connected and how it influenced other different things, in terms of, world evolution and stuff like that. It was just fascinating. And he backed it up. This was at the time, do you remember Pokemon cards?
Oh, yeah.
He backed it up with what he called Historicon cards. So he would make a card to go with it, and kids could earn these cards, like Pokemon cards, and he'd have like a picture of Pythagoras on there.
Right.
And he had a Freud one, and he would bring it all in. A Tsar of Russia, Catherine the Great, and you could collect all these cards. And it was but again, this is like so many teachers in Douglas County. This is how great our teachers are at taking what can be sometimes considered a more flat curriculum and make it come to life. And what a subject. I mean, think about how much fun history really is.
Oh, absolutely. And everything connects to history. There's a reason why all of these sequences happen, why all these things happen that can be connected back into other disciplines.
So next to technology, I think that this gives me a little promise. These new science standards unveiled for a lot of other subjects. I like the focus on, the scientific inquiry and the engineering.
Me too.
Piece that's in there. So.
Me too. So let's go to Florida for a moment.
Well, we are talking about
I read
classes.
Recently, Florida may alter their graduation requirements. And if you'll remember, and I think this has happened in several other states as well, I think New York's one of them, but it used to be in Florida that you had to take Algebra 2, successfully pass Algebra 2 to graduate. That was a milestone that you had to reach. Well, the Senate bill axes the Algebra 2 mandate in Florida, but it's going to count career tech certifications. So here, I'll read you the story, and then you can react to it.
All right.
I think you already read this, so didn't you?
I heard about this.
But I'll read it anyway so our listeners know. The Florida Senate has approved a bill that would alter graduation requirements by creating more options for students to earn a standard high school diploma that focus on career and tech ed. It would also allow options for students to graduate without taking Algebra 2, a change from current state requirements. What do you think?
Don't you need Algebra 2 to get into college?
Well, I think that that's probably one of the places where they start talking about remediation. If you don't successfully get through that, my guess would be that when you went and took that college placement test, that you probably would end up in an 0900 class, which would be the last stage of remediation.
So when we talk about personalizing education for today's student, we talk a lot about career pathways. We talk about having career plans, even academies. Here in Douglas County, we've got one for firefighting. We've got one for culinary arts. I mean, the list goes on. I think if we were able to truly personalize education for these students, that Algebra 2 should be dependent upon their pathway. That if they can actually, if they're going to need it, and it's going to be a prerequisite for their next step, their post-secondary step, right, then it should be included. But if you've got a kiddo who, and I don't know if culinary arts would require it or not, but if you have a guy that has decided that culinary arts is where he wants to go, and he's looked at schools beyond high school, and he's looking to graduate and graduate well and get into that culinary institute, if Algebra 2 isn't a prerequisite to the job or to his learning curve in this, then I can't argue that it should be part of it.
Congratulations, Senator Cutter. That's exactly what Florida is going towards. Senate Bill 1076 was approved in a 33-7 vote on April 10th. It directs Florida Board of Education to create additional pathways for students to earn diplomas with a focus on industry certifications.
Right.
So really what you're saying is that if you have the juice to be in the industry, what does it matter about Algebra 2?
Right. And if you ended up getting into college and you did need it, then there are those remediation courses now. But that wouldn't be because the child or the student didn't learn it the first time around. It was because they didn't take it. So, and I think higher ed's going to be responsive to this. They want their kids that come to them to succeed. They want to produce contributing members of society, just like we do. So a little articulation in Florida, and I think they're onto maybe something positive.
So indirectly in Colorado, the higher education admission requirements, those are the 17 credits. I think we talked about this 2 times ago.
Yeah.
What they say is that you have to take algebra, you have to take 3 years of math, the first one of which has to be algebra. And so if you do the math on how many math credits you'd need, it'd be Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2 is really what it comes down to.
Right.
The three math credits that they're not requiring, but they're making a strong statement that to get into any college in Colorado, that's what you'd need.
And what are the other choices? Trigonometry, and calculus? I mean...
That's usually the fourth year.
So it's interesting. I think when you were talking about graduation requirements, I kind of relate it to seat time. I mean, I don't necessarily think there has to be a finite number. If you look in the districts, I mean, we require 24, and we're the second most in the state, right? Or
yeah,
the
I think Air Academy is 25 or 24.
And everyone else is 23, 22, 21, and, they're still sending kids to college. So if we truly are meeting the needs of kids, that number isn't supposed to be, magical. Neither is they have to sit in a chair in a classroom for 1,000 hours a year to be considered. I mean, seat time doesn't have any sort of equation to success either. Again, it's going to come down to meeting the needs of that student and a great teacher.
That's correct. So let's move on. Got the another article here about the youth concussion law passes in Arkansas. This is interesting. Arkansas has become the 44th state to have a youth concussion law. 44th. There's only 6 others that do not have a concussion law now. I think Colorado was one of the first, and that was probably 3-4 years ago.
Right.
So here, this is the interesting piece. So tell me if this is really a law, because I'm struggling with this. They passed a law, General Improvement Fund in the pilot project on concussion management. However, this law does not require that an injured athlete be removed from play, receive medical clearance before returning to play, or that parents or guardians sign a concussion information form before their child can participate in interscholastic activities. So what does this law do?
You know what? That's the exact phrase that's going through my head. What does this law require? I mean, I'm going to try to repeat this. So you suspect a concussion. You don't have to take him out of the game.
Right.
You don't have to seek medical attention.
Correct. Well, you don't have to have medical clearance to go back in the game.
And you don't have to notify parents?
It says they don't have to sign a concussion information form before their child can participate in interscholastic activities.
So the fact that Arkansas is looking at it is a positive. But it's a glaring light on the fact that of the 44 states that have a law, these laws are very diverse.
Well, it's kind of like if a tree falls in the forest, and no one's there, do you hear it?
Does the tree have a concussion?
That's right. That's right. I mean, what would be the purpose of passing a concussion law that doesn't have anything to do with it? Maybe I missed something, but just from I'm going to have to look at this and read this because it does not make sense.
And I think because we have in Colorado a very good law, and we were talking about athletic directors, and we've got all of them have to be certified and trained, kind of like CPR and that first aid response. I mean, it's part of what we're doing now. Coaches have to have certain educational points to understand indicators of possible concussion.
And we do impact testing on students before they participate.
So Colorado's, what we do, let's look at this more because this is interesting. We should verify it. But what we do is what I thought was in accordance to the law, and it's very rigorous compared to this.
Absolutely. We'll walk through what it looks like for an athlete. So we'll be back to Ed Nation. You're listening to Castle Rock Radio with Dan and Chris. Welcome back to Ed Nation with Dan and Chris. We were interrupted during the downtime. We have a special guest with us this afternoon, but I did want to loop back to that concussion law piece first before we introduce our guest and start asking her a lot of questions. We're glad she's here to join us. But the youth concussion law passed in Arkansas. Basically, there was does not require the injured athlete be removed from play, receive medical clearance before returning to play, or that parents or guardians sign a concussion form, all of which are key things that we do in our concussion package that we have in Douglas County and across the state of Colorado. If you suspect that a student has a concussion, it's your responsibility as a coach to make sure that you analyze that situation. We also have trainers in Douglas County that are key to helping that student athlete out. We do require clearance before they can get back into a game or a practice, and we take concussions very, very seriously here. We notify parents of all of the different scenarios around impact with the head and make sure that student athletes are well aware of what could possibly happen, what are the danger signs. So I'm confused by the state of Arkansas's new, I guess it's a law.
That's what it says. It says it's a law. Yeah, this is one of those things that have had such national attention over the last few years that, first of all, to be last on the list, I mean...
they were 44th out of 50.
Yeah, to be last on the list to adopt something is already embarrassing. Second, to adopt something that doesn't do anything is not giving it the attention it deserves.
Well, we're going to have to do a little more research on that. So, joining us today is Dr. Dana Strother. She is our newest addition to our curriculum department. She is the Chief Academic Officer for Elementary Education, and we're just proud as punch that she's here today.
Well, I just want to thank you both for having me. I have tried so hard to get on this radio show, and so I'm just so excited to be here.
Well, the big fan favorite sign that you're holding out on the street saying, "I love Dan and Chris," was certainly a selling point for me.
I've been trying everything.
So, and I like the gift basket. That was nice.
Anytime. I would just like to add that it really does bother me that Arkansas would have that law because with all the research that's come out in the NFL around concussions and what it does long term, obviously this is a huge problem.
Yeah, we're going to have to look a little further into this to see why they don't have any specific provisions in there for safety of student athletes. So, Dr. Strother, would you talk to us a little bit about your background, about your job you do in Douglas County, and then we'll get to some specific questions.
Sure. You want me just to start with Douglas County's background?
Your background, right. What led you to Douglas County? So you were a teacher at some point?
I was a secondary teacher, started off in Chicago, and then moved back to Iowa, where our family resides. Then was a consultant for many years, and finally ended up here in Douglas County.
Mm-hmm. So what does a Chief Academic Officer of Elementary Education do?
That is a great question. I have that question asked of me a lot. Well, what we do is we look at curriculum instruction and how can we offer the best opportunities for students in Douglas County and offer them a world-class education so that they can be globally competitive when they leave these schools.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're being a little humble because, Dan and I work with you, so we know since you've come on, you've taken Colorado standards and core standards and federal standards, the Common Core, and you've kind of filtered them and you've kind of improved upon them.
What we did was we bloomed the Colorado academic standards, which are inclusive of the Common Core, and found that in many areas the most it was asking of students was application. So we felt in Douglas County that we wanted to go higher than that and work to the upper level of blooms. And so we considered that the floor, but we have provided world-class outcomes that focus on the top 2 level of blooms, which is evaluate and create.
And, you know, anybody who wanted to check this out just had to go onto our website and they could look under...
Well, not yet, because we're still getting feedback, but they will be able to go onto our website and look. We're redoing the website a little bit, but look for our Guaranteed and Viable Curriculum, which we refer to as the GVCs.
All right.
So, you know, last night we were doing a telephone town hall on behalf of the DAC.
I heard you were very popular on it.
Well, I don't know about that, but there were several questions. We always get a lot of questions about curriculum instruction and those.
Especially math.
Obviously, you know, our parents are very engaged in
Yes.
the instruction of their students in our district, which is very powerful and it's very helpful to our building principals and to teachers. But the question that this parent posed was about her second grade daughter coming home and doing college math, is what she identified this as. And she said, I know this because, you know, I've taken courses in math and I can recognize where this fits in the curriculum, and here's a specific piece my daughter was working on, and she's a second grader, and I just want to understand why you're having my daughter do college math in second grade. What say you?
About her daughter doing college math?
Yeah. What
I
would
would
be
say
a
if
possible?
that's true, wow, do we have a next president on our hands?
Well,
But secondly, I would say that's probably not typical of most second graders
Right.
in Douglas County, but we do hold them to rigorous standards. College level might be a little too rigorous, but we are asking that we up the ante, so to speak, with all grade levels, and we're sort of looking at doing more grade spans because we are asking our students to achieve at those top 2 level of blooms, which can be quite rigorous, but we know our students can do that.
So before you came in, Dana, we were having a discussion about one of the articles we read about out of Florida, where they are going to take out the Algebra 2 graduation requirement and replace that with industry standard certificates. So a student potentially could go through and take Algebra 2. That could be a criteria for graduation. But also if there was some industry standard certificate in some kind of a career and tech ed program that they could get, that they would meet that criteria. What do you think about that?
Not being a math teacher myself, I would say that most would advocate the importance of algebra and that it's the foundation for many other types of math. And so I would have to look into what that certificate would include and
Right.
how it would include those specific algebra requirements, because I do feel that it is the foundation for many other higher level mathematics.
Right, and I've been in one other school district in another state, and I know that we were talking about, you know, in Colorado, the higher education admission requirements, they talk about Algebra 1 being the first of 3 classes you need to take to be eligible for Colorado. So, you know, they haven't specifically said you have to take Algebra 2, but it makes it very difficult to get into a
Right.
college if you don't take that. So that was part of our discussion too.
Well,
So-
and it's not the first place that it's had the conversation. I mean, Texas has been having this bantering around for a while, and you know they have a number of higher institutions that probably make an accommodation for the lack of Algebra 2.
What is the accommodation?
I don't know, but there must be something. You would imagine if you were going into the culinary arts, you might not need Algebra 2
I don't know that I would agree to that.
because you're not doing the culinary arts program.
I actually am quite culinary when I'm at home and I'm making dinner, and that might include an algebraic equation every now and then.
An algebraic
So I think
conversation.
I think what they're trying to get to is, you know, for instance, in an automotive tech program, there might be some math that's specific to automotive technology that if you can demonstrate competency in that by doing that, you meet the criteria to graduate. And so it's embedded within the application of a industry that you want to be participating in rather than a standalone class.
I think that would be fine. You would just have to make sure that the quality is inclusive of those classes.
All right.
So, Dr. Cutter, what has been your main talking point today on the radio show?
We actually, this is a show that kind of bounces around. It's more education potpourri than, a specific place. We take national stuff and try to drill it down to Douglas County. So
Fascinating.
We have talked about athletic directors and graduation requirements and science curriculum. Have you had a chance to see the new robust science curriculum?
The national?
Yeah, they unveiled
Yes.
them. And
And
what's your thought? Next generation science standards.
Yes. I actually think it's quite good.
That's
I do.
what we were hoping.
Yes. And that's what you thought?
We haven't seen them, but we love the promise. All right, so let's talk about high school redesign. You want to hang out and jump in when you want?
I've been begging to get on the show. I'm
All
not
right,
leaving.
I don't think we're going to get rid of her.
No.
All right, so Dan, tell me if this is good. A flurry of good news appeared for high school. President Obama certainly wants to spend a little more money, throwing $300 million in innovation grants for just high school alone in a kind of mini race to the top kind of format. But in the data, it says in the past 40 years, the number of students taking and passing advanced placement exams has dramatically increased. More high school kids are graduating, and I think we can talk more about that. And more are getting college credit through dual enrollments. Sounds like high school's rocking.
Well, and we see the same reflection in our district. In the last 5 years, our AP tests taken in our district have almost doubled. The amount of concurrent enrollment that our kids have taken has, 1,000 times better than it was 5 years ago. So I think people really see the value of taking and making that senior year, junior and senior year in high school more applicable to getting college credits. And we provide many avenues for students to do that in our district. But I think it also speaks to people recognizing the rigor of what it's going to take to be something or something once you graduate from high school. The high school graduation is not the end now that it used to be. I mean, even as far back as when we were in high school, you get a high school diploma and you were still competitive for some jobs in certain places. That's not the case anymore. I mean, there's very few jobs for students with high school diplomas. In fact, you have to get to the certificate level, an AA degree at a community college would probably be the next place where you need to get to. But you have to have those additional certifications to be competitive and to have the quality of life. So I think our families in Douglas County especially have recognized that, and we follow that trend absolutely. One of the downsides of that is, at the same time we're talking about more kids being involved in AP testing, colleges are looking at what kind of credit they're giving for that. And there's colleges that are stepping back away from that and saying, that's really nice that you took that AP test. We're just going to give you placement credit. We're not going to give you the equivalent of taking a course in college. So that's the other part of the discussion that people have not had to this point that I think is a really important piece. And I would encourage our parents, as their kids are looking to matriculate to colleges, look at what their policy is around AP classes. And is there another way to get some of those college credits without taking AP, unless they're going to give you the credit for it, or unless what you're doing that for is to get a better GPA, or you want the additional rigor of learning in those classes.
Now, I'm all for putting money into schools. Do you think $300 million, which on the surface, $300 million is a lot of money, but you talk about every high school in the United States having an opportunity to apply to it. I mean,
yeah.
How much money does that really translate into?
Well, maybe I'm a little jaded, but I have a hard time believing that every single high school would have an opportunity to apply for that. I mean, I know that, and unfortunately in Douglas County, or fortunately in Douglas County, our socioeconomic status doesn't allow us to apply for a lot of these grants. And, I'm hoping that this is not one of those places where you have to have a certain SES or a certain free and reduced lunch rate in order to apply for it. If you do, that automatically excludes us. If you don't, I would assume there's a lot of very innovative things that our schools could go after with $300 million, but $300 million is not a lot. I mean, you look at our budget, it's a little bit more than half of what our yearly budget is in Douglas County.
Sticking on high school for a minute, throw you a curveball here. One of the most publicized communication tools in the U.S. put out a list of the 100 best high schools in the nation. I believe there were 3 Douglas County schools last year.
That is correct.
And if I'm correct, I don't know what happened. It doesn't make any sense to me because I know our schools are just as good, if not better, this year than they were last year. They are none this year.
Well, I think that this was, again, another really interesting piece of information that was given to us yesterday about 10 o'clock. And the first place that we all went to was show me the list. So you go in and look at the national ranking. There's no school from Colorado in the national ranking. And we're going to need to come back after the break here. But in short, the 20 schools, there was no one from anywhere remotely close to Colorado that was on that list. The closest school in Colorado was ranked number 58 nationally. That was Peak to Peak Charter out of Boulder Valley Schools. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about what the criteria was and how that changed from last year to this year. And you are absolutely correct. We have some fabulous schools in Douglas County that didn't make this list. But you're listening to Ed Nation with Dan and Chris.
And a special guest. What is your name?
Dana Strother.
Welcome back. You're listening to Ed Nation on CastleRockRadio.com, and we are joined by a special guest, Dana Strother, Dr. Dana Strother. This is the show that talks about everything education from the nation back down to Douglas County. And when we went to break, Dan, you were going to talk about this list of 100 schools?
Yeah, U.S. News and World Report releases a best high school rankings list every year. Last year, 2012, Douglas County had 3 schools on there: Rock Canyon, Highlands Ranch, Mountain Vista. This year, we had none. And so immediately went in and looked at, okay, how are they calculating this? Because that's the first thing you want to know is what makes this thing tick. I mean, it's the same as our district performance frameworks. You want to know what are the specific pieces of information they're looking for in which to rank you. And found out some interesting stuff. They've actually changed the way that they rank this. It's a 3-step process. And I'll read the steps to you, and then you can react to those. The first step in ranking toward the 2013 Best High School Rankings, which I believe is different than last year, is school students are performing better than statistically expected in reading and math. So we get a little check mark there because our students perform statistically better than expected.
Is statistically like a state or a national average?
I believe they do it against both. So for the national rankings, they do it against national. And then I think they also go back in and do it against the state performance pieces too. So then, after they get through step 1, they factor in the percentage of economically disadvantaged students who tend to score lower enrolled at the school to identify the schools that were performing better than statistical expectations. So
you're comparing schools against like peer group schools?
Correct.
Okay.
For those schools that made it past this first step, the second step determined whether the school's least advantaged students were performing better than average for similar students in the state. So I think we've talked about this before. In our district, we don't have a lot of what they would classify as least advantaged students. Mm-mm. So that automatically takes us to probably a place where they don't even consider our data because we don't have a big enough set of data. So then once they do that, then they step into one data point, and their single data point, because it's 2 data points potentially, using AP or International Baccalaureate test data as a benchmark for success, depending upon which program was the largest at the school. So if I'm at Douglas County High School and I have 250 kids in an IB program, and I have 700 kids in my AP program, they're going to take the AP program first. Most of our other high schools, it's all about the AP. And what they're really looking for, from what I can ascertain, is they're looking for the number of kids in the AP program and also the number of kids that take the AP test. And there's been a pretty big shift in schools lately based on what we talked about earlier with, not getting necessarily the credit. Am I going to throw $75 toward a test if I'm not going to get the credit for that class anyway?
Right.
So I don't think it's a huge bubble yet, but I know it was a conversation when I was a building principal because we used to make every single student take the AP test. That was a part of the grade. And so in a nutshell, they changed the way that they calculated this. So what I did is I went in and looked at the data for our schools, and I found out that if I was at Rock Canyon High School and they would have calculated like they did last year, I believe I would have been number 11 in the state of Colorado. I don't know where that would have put me in the nation because I didn't have time to calculate 18,000 high schools. Maybe I'll do that by Monday.
Yeah. Weekend project.
If I was at Highlands Ranch, I calculated I would have been 16th or 17th. And then I think Mountain Vista was something a little bit above that. But the other factor that we had, this is 2012 data, by the way, that they generate this list off of. So it was last year's data. The other piece that we probably would have had a bit of an issue with is class size. And, based on budget cuts, we had some pretty big bubbles last year that we tried to address through the budgeting process for this year.
I'm thinking that through, and I can't say that, any of that criteria isn't valuable, but do you think that's enough? I mean, shouldn't there be other things? I mean, teacher quality. You could even make an argument maybe for graduation rates and on the 4-year graduation rates.
Concurrent enrollment.
Concurrent enrollment would be another thing that would be great too. And I don't know if they should be weighted equally. I think it's slightly slanted towards different demographic schools.
Yeah, and in Colorado, in our district UIP, we have the indicator around post-secondary and workforce readiness. It takes into account ACT, the graduation rates, both as a composite and then also when they disaggregate it down to different groups. And then there's a third one that's not on the top of my head right now, but they try to do some different pieces.
Well, this list is more best highly impacted schools.
Well, and it's also all about the AP test and completion of the AP test, which I'm not disqualifying it because, I mean, obviously it's a piece of information, but, you know, as a parent, I wouldn't hang my hat on my kid's school is a U.S. News best high school.
Well, I reacted emotionally when I saw it. I went, what do you mean we don't have any Douglas County schools? These schools are great.
And you were probably nicer than me. You know, but again, I got to remember 3 or 4 years ago, I'm not sure, I can't remember if we had schools on this list or not.
Right.
So I mean, the list fluctuates. What I read in the information too on their website is every year 35% of the schools included in the list are new.
Well, if they're changing the criteria for consideration, I mean that narrows it down to a different set of schools every year.
Yeah, and that's what I think. There's some that are consistently going to be in there because of the students that they serve and the focus of their program. But unfortunately, we're not in that list today, but that doesn't mean we don't have some great high schools in Douglas County.
All right, so let's see if we can get a few quick hits in here as we end out the show. All right, either you guys jump on in. You know, sequestration, you know, they're going to be cutting things across the board. Well, the president was able to save a few things, including Title I and special ed. Yet, they're going to fund them exactly the same. However, we're having more students every year qualify for those two categories. So the dollars we have are being stretched further. Is that truly saving them?
No.
And why not? We're on radio, not television. Okay, let's try another one. Experts say a later school start helps sleep-deprived teens. A symposium looks at research and solutions around later start times for high schools. Experts recommend that high school age youth get around 9 hours of sleep per night, but the reality is that many teachers get 7 hours or less, according to the Sleep Foundation. One of the possible solutions to this is a later start. Chris?
Well, first of all, sports, part-time jobs, kids working outside, Red Bull. I mean, there's a lot of things that go against this. We have a Red Bull expert with us.
I thought these were quick hits. It's true, research shows that kids at that age need more sleep. But did you say teachers only get 7 hours? So this is also to help teachers get more as well?
It didn't have that in there, but you know, I seem to remember a school district neighboring us a couple years ago tried to put into practice having high school students go later. And I don't think they even made it through the first year without having to switch that back.
Well, the other thing is...
Because why?
Well, multiple siblings is another piece. You come home, a younger kid gets home before their older brother and sister who might be taking care of them or looking after them.
Or you have the kindergartner that's waiting for the bus at 6:30 in the dark. I mean, that's a challenge as well. So,
all right, so here's another one. So the meat lobby were able to, again, get around this sequester. They were rescinded last month. The meat lobby kept spendings from being cut in the Department of Agriculture to upgrade kitchen equipment in our public schools. The meat lobby.
I want to just verify this is the meat lobby.
This is the power of the meat lobby. Anyone?
I got nothing on that one.
All right.
What do you think, Chris? You seem to be pretty emotional about that.
I am not going to upset the meat lobby. They're obviously a powerful group. So, National Spelling Bee is not going to strictly be spelling. Get this, knowing how to spell words like guatepens and simotricious won't be enough to win the spelling bee. Now, you're going to have to be able to do an evaluation of vocabulary knowledge at the same time. Want to hear what it is?
Yes.
I do.
Multiple choice test.
You're kidding me.
Nope.
So a National Spelling Bee is going to have a multiple choice test for the winner.
That's what it says.
Did I tell you I finished 5th when I was in 6th grade in the spelling bee?
This show isn't just about you. All right. So here you go. New publishers' criteria. You ready for this?
Yes.
They're going to focus a majority of their time developing skills that are widely applicable. All right. That's great 1980 stuff, don't you think?
I do. So can you give me an example of a skill they're going to develop?
It doesn't give that far. It also says there'll be no more memorization techniques.
Wow, they have come a long way.
They have come a long way. And there's a few more. I'll give you one more. There will be a variety of answers.
To
Do you know,
what?
we kid about the fact that we have ingrained in public education that there is always one right answer, and actually letting kids explore that there might be more than one answer. So that last one kind of actually works.
I agree.
We hope.
All right, so criminal indictments this past month over retired Atlanta school superintendent Beverly Hall, and get this, 34 other people in the district in a master conspiracy to cheat in Atlanta.
Yeah, I've been kind of following this. I think this is really interesting how they could go as long as they did without someone stepping forward and saying that these things were going on. I mean, if you think about it, how many years was it that they were actually because they got a lot of their funding based on their test scores, correct? It was multiple years, was it not?
And they are pay for performance, so people were getting a little bonus here and there for the improved academics.
So I guess I'm really surprised that you could go multiple years without somebody stepping forward and going, wait a second, this isn't right. I didn't get my bonus because my kids performed X when I really tried to get them to perform. Like, why?
We got 1 minute and I got 2 more to really get in. So the federal government website was hacked. Aren't these the guys that are supposed to stop doing that kind of stuff? And last but not least, it turns out, scientific research here, more money spent on research, that a teacher who teaches with no hand gestures is more ineffective than a teacher who teaches with hand gestures. Any of you care to give me a hand gesture towards that one?
Thank you for joining us on Ed Nation. You've spent the afternoon with Dan and Chris.